Start. I'm John Strand, and with Commissioner Tony Grinberg, we're the co-chairs. So we look forward to working with all of you. It's no secret that this has been a long time coming, this process, and it's also really exciting that you're all here and going to roll up your sleeves and be part of this. I challenge everybody to make it the best you can make it. Be standing for the future. Be standing for the young people, all the demographics of our community, all of them. Make sure everybody's voices are included, and search for moments where you can find others that need to be rolled in to our discussions, because that's what makes a great community, is great people looking out for each other. So on behalf of the City Commission, I just really welcome you and thank you for joining in this process, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner Grinberg.
Thank you, John, and I'll just echo what you conveyed. In the interest of time, keep moving with introductions of the committee. So if we'd like to start on the end and work down.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Knutz, and I serve on the Fargo Board of Education.
I'm Vicki Dawson. I'm on the Fargo Park Board, and I live in the Claire Barton neighborhood.
I'm Rocky Schneider. I'm the Vice Chair of the Planning Commission.
Kim Sattel, Gate City Bank.
Mator Alier, Human Relations Commission.
And Tony Grinberg, City Commission, and I have the planning portfolio with my committee assignments.
John Strand, and Community Development is my portfolio, one of them.
Tim Flackel representing NDSU and also in the Horace Mann neighborhood.
Mason Rademacher, I serve as the NDSU Student Body President and then also work for the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce.
My name is Lenore King, and I'm here on behalf of the Fargo Native American Commission.
Wonderful. Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the CZB team. And just echo again Commissioner Strand's opening remarks. We're excited about engaging this process and excited to work with CZB. So Aaron, take it away.
Like Commissioner Strand said, I'm here just really to introduce the consultant team, CZB. They were selected out of a pool of 13 different consultant teams that proposed on this project months ago. So it's an exciting process. Great to have them here in Fargo for the first time to kind of kick things off here. The CZB is based out of Alexandria, Virginia, suburb of Washington, D.C. area. They've got a few offices kind of over throughout the country. And then most recently, I want to point out, too, that they have worked in the Midwest, most recently in the city of Des Moines, Iowa, helping them out with some of their core neighborhoods as well. And so it's a great team. We're glad to have them here. With that, I'll kind of hand things off to them. With the consultant team today is 4 of their members, Charles Buki, and please correct me if I'm pronouncing any of your names wrong, who is the founder and principal of CZB. Peter Lombardi is the project manager, here right next to him. Thomas Eddington, as well as Marcia Nedland. And so with that, I will hand it off to you guys to take things away. Thank you.
All right, thanks Aaron, and good morning. We're very excited to be here for this project, for this important kickoff week, and we appreciate your time being part of this committee and joining us here this morning. So I'll run through the quick list of our agenda here. We'll do a quick project introduction and process overview, the process that we'll be going through between now and November. We'll do a preview of housing market and neighborhood analysis work. That'll be an important part of the first phase of this project. And then we'd like to do some introductory discussion with all of you about some of the issues that you expect we'll be facing and should address through this process. So first, the project introduction and process overview. So we're dealing with 9 neighborhoods here surrounding downtown Fargo that really represent kind of Fargo's traditional 19th and 20th century urban neighborhood fabric. We're talking about an area that has 34,000 residents, so it's the size of a small city. It's a large territory, and we expect that this process that we'll be uncovering with the help of you as committee members, is also with the sub-area committees that I'll talk about in just a second. We'll kind of uncover a number of pressures, challenges, and opportunities. One of the things that we'll emphasize throughout this process is that these are diverse neighborhoods that are experiencing a variety of different issues, and that a one-size-fits-all plan or toolkit isn't going to suffice for these 9 core neighborhoods. So we've developed a process here that is designed to give kind of due focus and attention to the different issues that these 9 neighborhoods are facing. So what will we be doing? An important part early in the process is identifying and understanding the issues that the 9 core neighborhoods are facing. An important part of this process that will begin this week with our sub-area committees is beginning the process of defining desired outcomes. Exactly what does a desirable future look like in each of these neighborhoods, and how can that be a core part of the planning process? And also thinking about what is the community able and willing to do to achieve these outcomes. And so over the course of several months here, our goal is co-creating an implementable plan that will not just guide the city of Fargo, but will guide a wide range of stakeholders, both at the neighborhood level and other institutions in the city. So a plan that is that can be implemented and that also is useful to many different stakeholders. So the process that'll get us there, this particular committee here is one of 4 overall committees. There is a sub-area committee that's been established for kind of the north band of the core neighborhoods, the central band, and the southern band. And a few of you are serving on these sub-area committees. Each sub-area is comprised of 3 of the neighborhoods in the 9 core neighborhoods. Tonight's meeting is the South Committee, the South High, Lewis and Clark, and Clara Barton neighborhoods. And just to give you a quick sense of how these committees will be interacting with each other, and kind of how things will play out over time starting this month. Phase 1 is from February to roughly May, is really a period of exploring the issues that are present through stakeholder input from the sub-area committees, as well as data analysis, which we'll talk about in just a second. What we expect these meetings to be like for this project steering committee is to really focus as much as possible on kind of the big picture for the city as a whole, and for the core neighborhoods as a whole. And then we'll be tapping into each of those 3 sub-area committees to really understand what's happening at the ground level in those neighborhoods. So during phase 1, we'll be collecting data, getting input on issues, and exploring those with the sub-area committees and with this committee here. Phase 2, over the summer, will transition from understanding issues to beginning to put together the toolkits to respond to those issues. And once we get into the 3rd phase, where it's really packaging everything into the core neighborhoods master plan, you'll have a plan that combines a solid market context of each of the 9 neighborhoods, really outlines the issues that have been explored and understood, the implementation toolkit and recommendations for the core neighborhoods. And it'll be, at the end of the day, a document that combines 3 high-level area plans for those north, central, and south areas, and then 9 individual implementation briefs for each of the core neighborhoods. So the goal throughout this is to maintain a sense at each step of what's the big picture for the city and for the core neighborhoods as a whole, but then also providing really good direction at the individual neighborhood levels, so that everyone feels, whether you're a city commissioner or you're a neighborhood leader in the Clara Barton neighborhood, for example, you get a sense of exactly how you can use the plan to help guide your decision making and guide the actions that you take over the next 5 or 10 years. So for the project steering committee, we just have a quick list of what we see as roles and responsibilities. And we have we'll be going over a similar list of roles and responsibilities for the sub-area committees this week. But for this body here, we see all of you as serving as project ambassadors over the life of this project. All of you wear different hats throughout the community, so helping your colleagues understand what this project is about and the goals of this project, engaging with your colleagues and your neighbors and stakeholders to help them understand what we're uncovering through this project and gather information and feedback from them. Always trying to keep a kind of a citywide and systems level perspective on the issues that we bring to you, especially from the sub-area committees, to understand how the whole and the parts kind of work together. Aid certainly later on in the project with the process of designing new or modified initiatives to achieve the desired outcomes. So early on, just the three phases kind of go from understanding issues, data collection, through putting together a toolkit, towards putting together the implementation framework. Your roles and responsibilities will kind of change as we move through those phases. Before we move further, does anyone have any questions at this point, just from this high-level overview of the process and the phasing? Any questions at all, or any clarifications we can provide? Okay. So what we'll do next is provide an overview of the housing market and neighborhood analysis work that we'll be doing during phase one of the process, going from February through May. And so our goal here in this first phase, and this map here on the screen shows the context of the core neighborhoods within the entirety of the city of Fargo. Our goal in the first phase is to do a citywide housing market analysis, and even as much as we can a region-wide analysis of the housing market to understand what are the very influential trends influencing every housing market and every sub-market in the region. Sort of having that big picture in mind. What are the indicators of demand, investment, and disinvestment that are playing out in different pockets? Not just in the core neighborhoods, but throughout the region. What are some critical shifts in investment behaviors? So that'll be important work that we do early on, so that we understand the context, the market context that each of the core neighborhoods is influenced by and is influencing. But certainly putting special attention towards the core neighborhoods themselves, so that as we get into the toolkit phase two, that we have a really solid grasp of what is happening in these places from the housing market standpoint. What has been changing? Where does it look like they're going if nothing were to change going forward? And I think an important part of the market analysis is to assist the community, assist the sub-area committees and this committee with answering a few basic questions in all three phases, so that we can keep in mind what are the problems that need to be solved in the core neighborhoods as a whole and individual core neighborhoods. What do we need to solve them? And where do we need to solve them? Again, getting back to the point that this isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all. Are there certain things that need to be done in certain pockets to address certain problems? That'll be something that we're always coming back to. And then what solutions are likely to deliver the outcomes that the community is seeking, that the sub-area committees are expressing to us through their own experiences, but also the legwork that they'll be doing to be getting feedback from their neighbors. And we'll get back to these questions in a few more slides when we get to a little discussion portion here. In terms of the market analysis, we'll just briefly describe the data that we'll be relying on. Certainly Census Bureau data and other federal data on housing and demographics will be important, but the City of Fargo has already provided us with a lot of great administrative data sets that we'll be relying on, from everything from property assessment data, which helps us understand how valuations have changed over time, building permit activity, code violations, tax delinquency. The city has a very rich collection of data sets that we'll be pouring through. And throughout this process, we'll be presenting you with some maps to try to get your interpretive help on helping us understand what we're seeing as we map out the data. Some additional data that we'll be collecting that we don't have yet, but we'll be collecting through this process. One is multiple listing service, a database of comprehensive real estate transactions in the city, which will greatly assist with our market analysis. And then a field survey of housing conditions. And just to do a quick overview of what this will be, this is something that the the sub-area committees will be assisting us with during April and May. Basically, we'll be doing a comprehensive survey of residential properties in this city that are based on the scale you see in front of you. It's a windshield survey that looks at every single residential property and evaluates them on this 1 to 5 scale, where a property that is scored as a 1 is in great condition. The owners are staying on top of the details. There is pride evident in the ownership of the property. A 2 is a step below 1, but it's in good condition. It expresses pride. A 3 is a house that isn't clearly distressed. There isn't also clear pride kind of taking place in the property. It could go either way if you think, where does this house go in 5 years or 10 years? That's kind of the 3. It's sort of a question mark house. And then 4 and 5 are properties where there is distress evident in some way, whether it's peeling paint, a roof that clearly needs to be replaced soon. And 5s usually are reserved for properties that, the signs are overwhelming that this is a property in trouble. And the way that this will be communicated ultimately when we gather the data. Up on the screen here are images from our Des Moines work. Last year we completed 4 core neighborhood plans for the city of Des Moines, and that was based on an evaluation of their market that included a field survey of the properties in that city. So the map on the left shows the level of granularity that we can go with the collection of this data at the parcel level. The map on the right shows when we aggregate all of those scores into averages for blocks or neighborhoods. It helps to supplement our understanding and the understanding of stakeholders in terms of where is investment happening and not happening, where might property distress be something, where might that be one of the problems that needs to be addressed. So that'll be an important supplement to the housing market analysis. And now we'll go through a couple of slides that include some maps that we've been working on with data that the city has provided with us so far. Just to give you a sense of how we'll be using the data, how we'll be thinking about the core neighborhoods, and how the market analysis will play out over the next few months. So this first map here of the 9 core neighborhoods is the value per acre of single family and small multifamily properties from 2019, data from the city of Fargo based on assessed value. As you can see on this map, where the areas that have the dark red coloration, you have the highest value per acre in the core neighborhoods, and the yellows you see have the lowest value per acre. So this gives us a sense early on that certainly you don't have a monolithic housing market here. You have some areas where a combination of density and higher pricing contribute to greater valuation per acre, and you have some areas where whether because of lower density or lower prices, have lower valuation per acre. But this begins to help us see kind of some important value patterns that could be important to understanding what's going on and what problems or what opportunities might exist in these neighborhoods. Change in value per acre of single-family and small multifamily properties between 2011 and 2019. So going back to 2011 assessed value, comparing that with 2019 assessed value, And you can see that in all of these neighborhoods, and the units of analysis here are census block groups. So every kind of little rectangle you see that's like a different color, these are all at the block group level. And as you can see, all of the block groups in the 9 core neighborhoods saw growth in terms of the value per acre of single-family and small multifamily properties during this decade. The areas in red on this map grew by between 45 and 54% in assessed valuation when you look at it per acre. And the areas in yellow grew around 28 to 29%. So again, we get a sense on that first map of value per acre, kind of an overall sense of valuation patterns, and then here we get a sense of how things have changed over time. As we go along here, if anyone has any questions, or if you see something on these maps that you want to highlight that kind of tells you something, that you're able to interpret it in a way that might be helpful to us, let us know. I'm just sort of going through these, but if anyone has any questions, just let me know. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. The area east of Madison Unicorn, that's gray in color, what does that indicate?
Oh, that's the downtown, I believe. East of Madison Unicorn Park, that's the kind of the boundaries of downtown Fargo.
So that's not included then in
It's
the
not
core
included.
neighborhood?
That's right.
Oh, okay. And then is there any reason that, maybe this is obvious to you, why that area in the northwest corner of Washington is also not included?
So areas that aren't included that are within the core neighborhoods that are grayed out, it might be because there just aren't single family or small multifamily properties there. I think like the NDSU campus, I think that's probably why that's grayed out. That's a good question.
Fargo North and Teamsters and,
In the Washington neighborhood?
Note,
Okay.
North High, and then the NDSU land where this strip mall is.
Okay.
it's north.
Okay. A few other maps here, and you see the same areas grayed out here. This is building permits issued per 100 residential properties from 2015 through 2019. So the scale you see, that's number of building permits per 100 residential properties. So the red here, you have higher concentrations of permits over that 4 or 5 year period. In yellow areas, you had lower concentrations of permits within the core neighborhoods. So when we look at a map like this, we see in the red and the dark orange, that tells us those are areas where you have, more investment activity happening. And that's probably something we want to explore, in more depth over the next few months, is what kind of investment activity is happening there. And this could include renovation projects, new construction. It's kind of an all-encompassing look at building permits issued. Code enforcement violation notices per 100 residential properties. So this is another data source that we're looking at. This is for 2019, and this is not synonymous with like property distress. This is a map that just simply expresses where code enforcement actions took place in 2019. So something that we'll want to understand working with city staff over the next few months is how does code enforcement work in Fargo? How has it worked historically? How much is complaint-driven code enforcement, kind of driving code enforcement? That's the way it works in many communities, complaint-driven code enforcement. So understanding how that has historically worked and why we might see certain patterns of higher concentration of notices and lower concentration of notices, that's something that will be important for us to understand. Tax delinquent residential parcels per 100 residential properties for taxes from 2017 and older. So the red areas on this map had relatively, or had a higher concentration of tax delinquent residential parcels than the areas in yellow here. And so you can see that the Madison Unicorn Park, parts of Roosevelt, the northern part of Lewis and Clark, part of Horace Mann, those all had relatively high concentrations compared to other parts of the core neighborhoods. Something that'll be important for us to do as we work on this housing analysis is not just looking at the core neighborhoods, but also kind of toggling back and forth between kind of the citywide picture and then looking at the core neighborhoods and seeing how do patterns change, depending on sort of the level of the scale that we're looking at. But this is how these numbers play out when we're just looking at the 9 core neighborhoods here. The next few maps might be interesting to many people. Share of single-family homes occupied by the owner in 2019. This is an indicator that we develop looking at tax records. Basically, we assume that if a tax bill for a single-family property is being sent to that property, we assume that it's because the owner lives at that property. And if it's being sent somewhere else, it's because it's an investor-owned property. In most markets, we find that that's a very solid assumption to make. And so that's what this is based on here. So you see in red on this map means that 90% or more of the single-family homes we presume are occupied by the owner. And in the lighter shades on this map, you have, especially in the lightest yellow, you have fewer than 50% of single-family homes that are occupied by the owner.
Question.
Sure.
How do you handle P.O. boxes in this case? I mean, are those, based upon your definition, it sounds like they are ones that would be deemed non-owners, and sometimes it's just, P.O. box is just a convenience.
I think usually we would presume that it is an investor that would have, but you're saying that you know of owner occupants who might receive their tax bill at a P.O. box. But that potentially would be something that we run into. Okay. Percentage point change in single-family home ownership occupancy 2011 to 2019. So if we make that presumption about owner occupancy and we look at 2011 versus 2019, what has changed? You see in blue and teal, or aquamarine, I'm not sure what color that is, on this map, are areas that saw an increase in owner occupancy rates for single-family homes between 2011 and 2019. So parts of Madison Unicorn Park, part of Horace Mann, a few parts of the south end neighborhoods there. And then where you see the red and the dark orange, those are areas where, again, based on our presumption about owner occupancy, there was a decline in single-family owner occupancy during that period. You can see that magenta, that darkest red, is right near the university. And the last map we have to share today is a look at affordability, or sort of an early look at getting a grasp of affordability issues in the core neighborhoods. An important ratio that we look at when we're beginning to work in a housing market is this ratio between median home value and the median household income in a market. If a market has a ratio of value to income that's between about 3 and 4, what that tells us is that the typical household in that market can afford the typical house. So if you're, let's say in a specific market, the average or the typical household makes $50,000, and if that ratio is 3 to 4, that means that typical householder can easily afford the typical house. So right now in Fargo, for the city of Fargo, the ratio is about 3.7. And for the county, I believe it's around 3.4, 3.5. So what that tells us is that in the Fargo market, generally the median household can afford the median house. And that range of 3 to 4 also tells us that this is a market where supply and demand are generally in balance. Where a market we might describe as overheating would be like a San Francisco, where right now the ratio is about 9 or 10, well above kind of that 3 to 4 range. A place like Boston is around 6 or 7. In a distressed Rust Belt community, the ratio would be like 1.5 to 2.5. So Fargo as a whole being at around 3.7 means it's generally a balanced market, and again the overall story is that the typical household can afford the typical house. Right here is a map where we take that ratio and we look within the 9 core neighborhoods. And we can see that for most of the block groups in this area that are orange to light yellow, you have a ratio that is below 3.5. So it's actually a ratio that's lower than the city's overall ratio. But you also have some block groups that are red here where the ratio is higher than 3.5.
I have a question on that.
Sure.
Is that accounting for because a lot of them looking at the Roosevelt NDSU neighborhood just south of 12th Avenue and north of 8th there, those are almost all renters that live in there. Mm-hmm. Which income is accounted for that? Would it be the homeowners or the rentees?
It is all households. It is all households.
So the household that's living in there. So then it would be the renter's income, not the homeowner's income?
That's right. That's
okay.
Right. So whoever is living in that neighborhood, their neighborhood is included in that. But I think one important thing that
because I'm wondering if it's skewing the data quite a bit, specifically looking in that neighborhood, because a lot of college students that are renting down there are able to purchase the home that they're renting in.
No, that's a very good observation, and that's something that this map tells us right away, is that you have student households that are probably skewing this map in certain ways, and that's always an issue when we're working in a place with a large university, is that you have obviously students who won't report much of an income but are paying the same housing costs as a household that is working. So when we see the dark reds on this map, that tells us that we have some student household noise that we need to account for in understanding the affordability issue. It also tells us, the dark reds on this map, that we probably have a few areas where you have lower incomes, and the housing prices from the data we've looked at so far. The housing prices here are not high. They're not as low as certainly distressed markets, but they're not high. So where you have red on this map, it's generally going to be a low income story that is kind of the basis for affordability challenges. And so that's something that we'll be working to understand more over the next few months. But that's a good point looking at this map.
Yeah, because just one observation I have just looking at the maps as we've clicked through them. The one map that you showed a while back in regards to whether or not the homeowner actually lives there,
yeah.
I think that laying that over this map, you would see a lot of duplication, specifically within that Roosevelt NDSU neighborhood. And I think that would just prove or show maybe a little bit stronger that it's primarily students living in those areas. So
yeah. You're probably correct, yeah.
I kind of have a two-parter. One, the first part plays off of that. Do you make any assumptions as far as plugging a number for, say, here's what we typically have, that we plug a number for income for a college student?
No.
Okay.
No.
And then second part is in kind of looking at some of the areas, a couple of areas here where you have a higher ratio. How do typically neighborhoods that have a higher preponderance of retirees play into this scenario?
Charles, do you want?
Could you go to a microphone, please? Could you go to a microphone, please?
To the first question, we do run several models. We'll test a number of what if scenarios. What if 20% of undergraduates are working 16 hours a week at $8 an hour, at $7 an hour, at $10 an hour? What if they're working a higher volume of hours? What if a certain percentage of the graduate students are working in the market? We run those. We try to sort of then anticipate what percentage of what part-time jobs are being consumed by students in the local market. And then we sort of ask the question, what does that seem to suggest for household income? So that's one piece. The second piece in a place like Roosevelt NDSU is also that properties are assessed somewhat, they function on the market different than they may function in the eyes of an assessor. Okay, so in the eyes of a buyer of a former single-family house that's been cut up into 5 bedrooms, each renting at $475 a piece, and each room padlocked, for instance, and it's a non-conforming use, that has a cash value, for instance, of maybe $2,500 a month or $2,000 a month for someone. And so its present value, I mean, it's calculated present value on that cash flow creates a different kind of a market scenario than an assessor is typically going to pick up, right? So it comps out a little differently. We try to think about that. It's hard to actually nail that down and quantify that unless you're with the chief and with the fire department going house to house, cracking it open and seeing exactly what's inside of each house. You make your best guess on what's going on. But so in an area up around 12th Street, we have a pretty good guess about what's going on. You see 6 cars out front. It doesn't take a genius to know what I'm going to find on the inside, right? And then we find a P.O. box someplace that's over in Minneapolis, and we know somebody's extracting some value. Then we look at the tax delinquency map, and we know exactly what's going to happen because they're going to be 24 months late on taxes. They're going to pay in the last week. We know we have a bit of a round robin to cope with, and it's going to be there and not elsewhere where we have that issue. So we do think about that. Was there another question that I think somebody asked?
Well, I just ask about, if this sometimes shows where seniors, because I'm looking at one of the areas with the ratio, and that would lend itself to people that are retired.
We will look at demographic
Does that show up
portraits.
sometimes?
Sure. So we'll pull back and we'll discover, as we did discover, for instance, the median age in Roosevelt and NDSU is 10 years younger than the median age someplace else. So it confirms those suspicions. And we'll look at median age at block group geography and have some sense of where seniors are when we then pull 236 and 202 and other senior housing projects, and we start to begin looking at the seasoning of mortgages. We can begin to suss out where seniors are. We'll pay attention to that. Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I think, an important purpose for a map like this, because this is just the simple ratio of median home value to median household income, but in looking at this map and like teasing out some of the the things that you're noticing, what are some sub-stories that we need to really dig in and explore. That'll be an important function for this committee here as we come back to you with iterations of analysis, especially on something like affordability, which will be part of our citywide analysis and part of our core neighborhoods analysis. It's a complicated issue. We'll come back with iterations of analysis to kind of, again, tease out wherever we can some little, a little pocket here or there where there might be something going on that with the right data, if we look closer, we'll figure out exactly what's happening. So that's something that your your experience on the ground will be important in helping us with. Before we move on, these are our maps for now. Were there any other questions, something that you noticed, as we went through these, or any questions you have in general about kind of the market analysis, the data we're working with, and kind of what we're doing in this part of the project?
I would, the one slide you had on inspections, I think it's important. I'm looking at Bruce Terrelson, who leads our inspections department. Must have been about 2017, 2018, we added staff to the department and had a number of situations where a unanimous vote by the city commission to enforce the code. And that's one of the concerns we've heard over time from the neighborhoods is there is no enforcement or no consequences of somebody letting their home go to deteriorate. And so that has changed. Now, I don't know if the data is going to be robust enough between 17, 18 and today, but I think it's important to draw a distinction. And when that change occurred at policy level at city and look in a rear as far as, the data. Again, I think it's just important to distinguish that all the data together is going to look different from a standpoint of policy change 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's very important to understand. Oh, thank you. Anything else? Yes.
I was just wondering if with these maps and the overlay, if the delinquency in taxes and the code violations correlate?
It's possible. I would say, yeah, it looks like there are a few areas like in the Roosevelt that are kind of higher concentrations on both. It's possible that there is kind of a combination of things going on there where you might have some, lower income householders who might be struggling to pay both taxes and make improvements to rectify code violations. So that's very possible. That's a good eye. Any other questions? So we'll probably, going forward, we'll at each of these meetings, we'll have some new analysis, especially through the first phase of this project, some new analysis to share, some storylines that we see emerging that we'll want to test with you, that we'll want to get a sense from you that, are we going off track on something? Or if you see something going on that you have a knowledge from your experience that there might be a pattern that you want us to know about, that you want us to explore, that'll be extremely helpful for us.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? One data I'd like to see is maybe for another correlation is house calls from the police department.
Yeah.
See if there's correlation between some of this data and where the police go, because I know as the City Commission and Planning Commission consider a number of policy items, you try to say what's the greater good and where do you maybe save costs elsewhere by, keeping neighborhoods up to speed, that sort of things.
No, it's a good suggestion. Yeah. Okay. So with that, we'll move on to the next portion of our agenda here, which is just to kind of initiate a discussion on some issues here, and I'll hand it off to Charles for this.
It's like places you put your feet on the ground. So first, let me say thank you very much on behalf of my colleagues for having us here. We're excited to be able to do this project with you. We're really looking forward to it. We had a very robust interview process. We learned quite a bit, actually, in that process, and we're gratified for the opportunity, so thank you. One of the first things that I would wish to communicate to you is both the value of having the aspiration of an implementable plan, right? Something that people can feel confident will find its way through the process, right? And engendering trust along the way. But the difficulty of doing that, right? Every one of our clients asks for an implementable plan. So I'm just going to take a few seconds and just go through some of the points that are sort of boxes. It's not as perfunctory as boxes we have to check, but certainly steps that we want to, as a group, as a steering committee, keep our eyes on to actually make that happen. So first is we're going to be listening very carefully to what your priorities are. So throughout the project, if we encourage you, welcome you, beg you to let us know, to let Marcia know, Thomas, Pete, myself, know what your priorities are in this project as they shift, as they change, as they come into focus. What are they? Okay? That's really important. When you find that you're communicating your priorities to us, as you would if you were a steering committee for a comprehensive plan, and you find that that list has grown from 2 to 22, try to just give us the top 2 or 3, right? Because you're not going to get to the other 17. So what are your top priorities? It's an act of discipline that is essential at the front end of making something implementable. Right? The second is we'll be listening very carefully after we hear your priorities, or what are you able to do? We're going to look at your general fund. We're going to look at how many full-time officers the chief has. We're going to try to understand how many code enforcement officers you have. How does your assessor process work? How do all the processes fit together? So what is your capacity? What is your ability to activate on those priorities? We're going to be listening for that. And if anything you can tell us that sheds a light on that will be very, very important. More important than prioritization even, and then your ability is we're going to be listening very carefully to what is your will to implement, okay? And so for every affordability aspiration you have, we're going to want to see an offset in your budget to pay for that affordability aspiration. For every non-compliance on affordability that frustrates someone, we're going to be wanting to know, are you 2 code enforcement officers short and you're unwilling to hire 2 more code enforcement officers? There's going to be something that's a give for every get. We're going to be listening for that. What's your willingness? With that said, I thought we would take a few minutes and just, if you could just let us know who are listening, what's the best way that we can serve the Fargo community? You know, we're here, we know housing, we know neighborhoods, and we know planning and design, right? We can be really, really good partners to you. What's your advice for us? What questions so we could take a few moments and your advice, your questions, your concerns, actually. You know, you look under the hood of something, you know, and you're not quite sure what you're going to find sometimes. And so you may have advice, you may have questions and concerns that you want to convey to us. We would benefit greatly if we take a few minutes with that. And on these questions up here, the most important words that I often come back to when we ask clients this is, first, what's the problem, right? With real discipline, right? Are you asking us to really look at 27 problems, 16 and a half problems, or 2, right? What are they? Really, what are the problems? The second is where? What's the geography of them? And then finally, the outcomes. What are the outcomes? Before we get to solutions, before we get into this is how we have to do it, tell us what the what is, right? So, regrettably, we're not at a table. It's a little tricky. It's more formal than being at a table. But if you have, any of you, questions, concerns, aspirations, advice that you would share with the 4 of us, we would welcome that. Which we could take now, or you could think about it and we could do in subsequent meetings.
Thank you. I think those are great discussion points, and I guess I'll kick it off.
I can't read your name.
My name's Rocky Schneider.
Rocky, okay.
I'm on the Fargo Planning Commission. I also live in the Horace Mann area and grew up in the Hawthorne neighborhood. So
okay.
This is near and dear to me. I think one of the things we struggle with on Planning Commission is we want to preserve our neighborhoods, but we also realize that there are areas within those neighborhoods that are maybe past preservation point as housing stock is aged or not kept up. So at the same time, as a city, we want to encourage redevelopment where it's appropriate and in an appropriate fashion. And I think where we struggle is with what maybe individual houses or what individual blocks do we want to preserve and keep old housing stock, and when do we want to encourage a developer to come in and, you know, with some incentives or whatnot and turn that over into new housing stock.
So if I hear you correctly, this is preserving both the form, right? But it's also preserving the feel of a place, right? That's a concern?
Yes, I think those are both concerns, because I think what we really ultimately want for the citizens is some sort of consistency and predictability.
Okay.
That, you know, if they move there, it'll
so
retain the same.
If there's a scrape opportunity for a developer, right, to take down a 1952 750 square foot home that was suitable 60 years ago, 70 years ago, but is not quite market suitable now on a valuable piece of land, what goes in its place? You know, what does the development code allow? What's profitable, and are those 2 things consistent with what the neighbors expect and want on their block? Is that right?
Yeah, I think balancing those things is important.
Okay, is that something you do well now? Is that something you do well in some parts of the city, but not all parts of the city?
I guess from my perspective, I think the city is going through that process in a pretty good way.
The community. Can we use the word community only because when you say city, I think city planning staff. So the community.
The community, but I think where we run into issues, I think when we get down to individual neighborhoods.
Okay.
And maybe the feeling from the neighborhoods isn't that change is tough. And so I think having a more clear path on when is change likely to come. You know, I mean, at what point, you know, on your scale of 1 to 5 for housing,
okay,
and neighbors start to expect, okay, the city's going to step in here at some point and do something, or a developer is going to step in here and do something, but then they also have a clear idea of what they might do. You know, what sort of requirements are in place for them to be able
So some clarity about what to expect would be valuable. Is that right?
Yeah.
Are there some neighborhoods that are more and less vulnerable to and more and less skittish and anxious than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think where we see it most is where the market pressures of the NDSU neighborhoods have a lot more developer interest than maybe others. I think with the Hawthorne neighborhood, for instance, where maybe it's a little more affluent, I think the individual homeowner market takes care of itself because they have maybe more of the means to put back into their homes and keep them up and revitalize them. Where in the North Fargo neighborhoods, there's maybe more outside pressure coming in for that.
One of the things that I would encourage you to use our team for throughout the process is we're very hardwired to answer the disposition question, which is our internal way of asking ourselves, what's going to happen with this property in the next 20 years? What's going to happen with the owner when the owner, who's 72, right, moves? And they sell, or they pass away and their children inherit the house, and then what are they going to do with the property? So this notion of the disposition, what's the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of anticipated life of as many structures as we can think about in the city, is we're pretty good at that. And I would encourage you to participate in that conversation with us so that we can understand where certain blocks are worried about the disposition of their block. Good. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that we've been concerned about is the demographics in the neighborhoods, particularly in relationship to the schools and parks, because we'd like to see the core neighborhoods friendly neighborhoods for people to raise families and to support those neighborhood schools.
Family friendly is what is important.
Yes,
okay?
But also not only just that concept, but also the numbers of younger people who would be in the schools, which are primarily elementary schools. And also, I guess, family-friendly in the sense that the neighborhoods are safe. So if you're having a lot of troubles like police calls and code violations and that sort of thing, that reduces the safety of the neighborhood for people who might think about buying. And so those issues are all related in terms of neighborhood preservation.
So you would want us to pay particular attention to the transition of some neighborhoods and whether or not they're moving away from being family friendly and becoming less safe. That's
true.
Did I get that right?
Yes, and then sometimes as the boundaries of the developed areas expand from downtown, there's a transition there that may not support the neighborhoods.
Can you elaborate on that last one? I'm not sure I understand.
For instance, if 2 blocks are purchased by a developer, allowed to run down, demolished, and then put up a massive building of some sort, that is a problem in terms of its relationship to the residents of the neighborhood because it incorporates a different demographic.
So not unlike at the planning commissioners, Rocky's concerned to some extent,
yes,
right?
That's
so there's
right.
A new form. It changes the flow, the expectation, the predictability, who's there. It changes a lot, right?
Yes, and what we would like to see in terms of the core neighborhoods is that they circle downtown and that coming to downtown is a good experience. For instance, that there are green spaces and walks and paths.
So it transitions nicely. It's a transect. It just
Yes.
works its way from the neighborhood to downtown in a way that makes sense to someone walking.
Yes, that's right, and feels safe.
Okay. Do you have concerns on safety that come to mind?
Well, I think that safety is a concern in dilapidated properties in particular because, for instance, in the Roosevelt neighborhood, as more apartments became available to the students who at one time lived in converted houses, then there was another element that started to move in, and those.
So the students move out.
Yep, the drug.
And now it's still a rental. So
and
now we've got somebody else who has a cash flow issue, and so they're going to make sure that those rooms are rented out.
Yes, it's that, but also that the people who move into those vacated, dilapidated properties are more apt to be drug-related criminal activity. So that's the element too that relates to.
So you have concerns about who's moving in and who's moving out of some of these neighborhoods.
Yeah, and we would actually like too to see some incentives for homeowners or for people to buy houses and have the capacity to fix them up and preserve them.
That's good. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone elaborate or, yes, ma'am?
I'd like to build on, well, everything that's been said today. So serving on the,
You're in the Board of Education, right?
serving on the Board of Education for Fargo Public Schools and lived in the Clare Barton and Hawthorne neighborhoods for about 25 years. Now I live in North Fargo, north of the Washington area, actually. A conversation that we're always having in Fargo Public Schools is how to use our buildings that are funded by taxpayer dollars efficiently and effectively. And the maps that you showed all really help indicate some of the challenges, I would say, that we have had in the schools in North Fargo, specifically in terms of population in those schools and kind of keeping the buildings full.
So you're having enrollment balance
Yes,
challenges.
yes.
Okay.
And so I would very much appreciate a conversation where we are being sensitive to how are our schools affected by some of the decisions and the conversation that, that we're having. South Fargo, really anything from the interstate down south where we have all of the real big growth in Fargo, that's where we're needing to have the conversations about our schools are too full. Are we gonna need to add on? Are we gonna need to build another school? And that conversation is going on in our city right now, in our school district. But on the flip side, what happens in North Fargo is the population is so different that it's tough to keep our buildings at capacity, really. And so we get it's the push and the pull of how much are we supposed to be switching, how should we be switching
I've got
our
capital
boundaries?
costs. I have capital
Right.
costs on 16 schools up here that are losing population, and I've got to fund new school construction where I'm growing, right? So how do I balance that? That's very difficult.
So thank you so much for having, providing us with the opportunity to have these good, thorough conversations. I'm very much looking forward to the opportunity of city and school district being able to work together as public entities. I oftentimes feel like, as a school board member, that we're planners too. The decisions that we make have an impact on the city of Fargo and vice versa. So just the opportunity to have a little bit more of that brought to light will be appreciated.
I appreciate the question and the raising the issue. We will focus on the relationship of settlement patterns, right, to the capacity, the right sizing, whole and its smaller geographies, the right sizing of the two. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
What else? Yes.
I'll join in with one of the concerns I have is the information about what is the future of our college populations and the impacts of the neighborhoods right around our campus. So I'm specifically talking NDSU and the Roosevelt neighborhood especially, but we have 70-some% of those homes are already rented out, and then we have really a movement of consolidated housing, newer apartment housing for folks, the students nearer campus to move into. And what I don't know and what I'd like to know is how much can we learn about what's the expected future for the university's population. There's a lot of discussion out there about higher ed and distance learning and localized, all that whole discussion. But if we can get a handle on what their future looks like relative to our neighborhood around the campus, I think that'd be really key.
That is no easy task. We will focus hard on that. We anticipate that. The demographic curve is something we all have to pay attention to. From 62 to 72, every state university in the country exploded in population and exploded in their capital expenditures. And then suddenly a lot of these buildings were a little bit empty, and by the time they were refilled again, they were a little bit tired, and then we got another population expansion not so long ago, and so enrollments have gone up, as has the demand to have an ever increased level of education. it is unclear whether or not those high enrollment numbers are going to stay, right? And so the resistance by some universities, some colleges to absorb all of the capital costs of housing on campus, right, shows some wisdom, but at the expense of the surrounding markets that have to absorb all of the overflow. So figuring out what's going to happen the next 20 years is going to be very tricky. We'll do our best.
And just quickly adding to that, and Don alluded to that and others, my guess is we're going to have opportunities to transition some of those properties back to single-family homes.
Yes.
So then how can we do that best? And what can the community do to step it up and get the best quality, the best owners, incent them to improve their neighborhoods and what, and I know there's discussions, but how can we really accelerate that?
It's a great question. And so without getting into 5 steps ahead to a quick solution, I can give you a bit of a forecast to think about, okay? So let's suppose around, 2 blocks off of 12th, there's a handful of properties that have converted. They're non-conforming. They're 1,700 square foot, single family, 4 squares, built in 1915. They've converted into 3-bedroom rentals. 3 of every 4 are owned by somebody who doesn't live here. They're a great cash cow for somebody, right? They're not putting any money into it. And it's the wear and tear on not just the property, but the sense of fatigue on that block is overwhelming sometimes, right? It's just so many cars, so much pressure, right? So reclaiming that one house at a time is possible, but it's not inexpensive, right? And so when you look at the development code and you look at private property rights, right, you certainly can circumnavigate that, but at a cost, right? So if the market value is $175,000 for one of those structures, right, or that's the asking price, that's the threshold, that's the hurdle rate for an absentee investor, we can reclaim that. We're just going to have to pay that. We, as the 4 of us, you're going to have to pay that. So somebody's going to have to stroke that check. And if you have 100 of those, you're quickly at $2 million, right? Now, for that $2 million, what do you get for that? You have site control over a couple of hundred structures. You've got the capacity to rehab those. That's going to cost you $100,000 to each rehab those. Now you're at $5 million, right? So are those things worth it? This goes to the priority question earlier, right? So for $5 million, we can reclaim 6 blocks of right around Roosevelt very quickly, right? But it's an expensive proposition, right? And when we do that, we're going to gin up demand, which means we're going to gin up price. Is that what you want, right? So we're here to help you figure out which levers to pull with what consequences. We will absolutely look at that. Yes.
Hi, Charles, my name is Tim. Just 4 quick things. I think one thing that we're experiencing now is because of new housing stock coming online.
Infill or as you're pushing out?
No, for campuses.
Oh, okay, right.
Campus, staying with the campus
on
theme.
campus.
Well, that they can feed into.
Oh, okay.
But because of that, there's going to be more pressure on those that don't take care of their place, and we're seeing that already to increase the quality of their place.
Like
otherwise,
peer
no
pressure?
one's going to rent it.
Like peer pressure?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
Yeah. So that. Secondly, no one knows what the future will hold for any kind of higher ed enrollment on site or butts in the seat or online. Generally speaking, in North Dakota, we graduate 7,000 plus change now, and by 4042, I think we're projected to do 12,000 plus change. So they're trending in the right direction, but there's a lot more pressure on it. There's other parts of the country in the Midwest, there's a great depopulation as a result of that. As far as things that I hope that you help us with is to help distill down what's the art of the possible. We have these issues. Which ones can we, really make a change in, and which ones are just really not realistic? To help us with that, because from an independent standpoint, you folks have the ability to say, we see this with a clean set of eyes, and all the rest of us have certain biases or perceived biases. Point number 3, if you could on your maps probably put landmarks, like in blue or something, like HM for Horace Mann. I think that will help. I've walked a lot of those streets, so I know where they're at and everything, but I think if you pick some of those out, when you go to your sub-meetings, that will help them identify, oh, that's 12th Avenue North, that's 19th Avenue North, that's, Cardinal Minch, El Zago, variety of Oak Grove, that kind of thing. I think that helps them picture better in their mind's eye where they're at. And one of the challenges that we'll face is that balance between predictability and flexibility. I was on the Fargo Planning Commission a long, long time ago, and I think the only one in the room that I know of that was around at that time was Jim. But we kicked out the new land development code in about 97, 98, to try to make it more predictable so that developers know if I do these things, here's what happens. Unfortunately, the neighborhoods we're talking about here, it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So we in the city are trying to compensate for what I'll call the sins of the past. I live in a house that was built in 1929, 50-foot wide lot. So the reality is if you were to try to, put the same overlay on that one as you do on other parts of town, it really doesn't work very well. So then it kind of comes back to that nuance of, should we do this for that neighborhood? We have alleys. We're one of the few neighborhoods that have alleys. A lot of them don't. How does that play into some of these things? So to try to have that, so it's a workable solution. So we want to reinvest in our homes and keep them up and keep them shiny and great through peer pressure and a variety of other things, but so that we can do that with the ability to work with everyone. And the city staff's been great. It's just that they're sometimes harnessed by the rules that I help and others help put in place. So guilty as charged right here, going back to the 90s. But some of this is at the turn of the 1900s that they're trying to deal with. How do we address this when it's very different than any other part of town? If you look at Kennedy Court as an example, I would challenge someone to say there's a whole lot of Kennedy Courts in Fargo. Because I don't think that there is, but maybe I'm wrong. But you have some houses in there that are, I think there's one that's 730 square feet, and they're happy to be there. But it's just a quiet little neighborhood type thing. So, thank you. Thanks again for doing this, because it will address a big challenge that we all have to talk to people about and face.
Thank you. Sir, is there any additional advice, questions? Yes, Kim.
Kim Sotelo with Gate City Bank, and so we've been very, very fortunate to have a longstanding relationship with the city, and we currently have a revitalization program. So one thing that I would love to get some additional feedback on is, certainly open to the idea of nuanced changes to revitalization. Currently, the program we have, part of the fundamental of that was to attract owner-occupied young families to participate in the school districts. But certainly I know that there's a relevancy to those that are aging in place. They may still have the need for repairs to their homes. And so how do we potentially pivot the dynamic of those kinds of revitalization programs to help a spectrum of the demographic in the communities?
Okay, so it's not just bringing new folks in, but it's really respecting the residential community